And we are back for prepping for winter. Last time Stannis talked with Theon about the upcoming Battle of Ice, and now the Karstarks have arrived for a supposed breakfast with Stannis. The man beside him could only be his son. 50, Theon judged, with a round, soft face like his father's, if Lord Arnulf went to fat. Behind him walked 3 younger men. The grandsons, he surmised. One wore a chainmail byrnie. The rest were dressed for breakfast, not for battle. Fools. Your Grace, Arnulf Karstark bowed his head. An honor. He looked for a seat. Instead, his eyes found Theon. And who is this? Recognition came a heartbeat later. Lord Arnulf paled. His stupid son remained oblivious. So as we know, Arnulf Karstark is a false friend to Stannis, but it's also important to know his family tree. He hopes that the Lord of Karhold, Harrion, wherever he is, will be executed, and the castle will pass to his niece Alice, who he hoped to marry to his son Cregan. Here's the family tree. Now Jon Snow ruined this plan by marrying Alice to a Thenn, but Arnulf doesn't know this yet. And there is a question to which Karstarks were aware of the plan. After all, this plan doesn't really benefit Cregan's younger brother Arthur, who is here in this scene. And we aren't sure if these grandsons that are in the scene are through Cregan or Arthur, or a mix of both. So I imagine Stannis is trying to determine who is a traitor and who isn't. And interestingly, one of the grandsons is dressed in armor. So I do wonder if he knew what was going down. So almost immediately Arnulf outs himself by recognizing Theon. Arthur, though, has no idea who Theon is, pointing to his innocence. There are no chairs, the oaf observed. One of the ravens screamed inside its cage. Only mine, King Stannis sat in it. It is no iron throne, but here and now it suits. A dozen men had filed through the door, led by the Knight of the Moths and the big man in the silvered breastplate. You are dead men, understand that, the king went on. Only the manner of your dying remains to be determined. You will be well advised not to waste my time with denials. Confess, and you will have the same swift end that the young wolf gave Lord Rickard. Lie, and you will burn. Choose. So Stannis has brought the Karstarks in for confessions. Now confessions are almost always sought when guilt isn't certain. So Stannis seems to be trying to determine which Karstarks were part of the plan and which Karstarks are innocent. Now Stannis asks the Karstarks to choose. We have of course heard this language before. Brienne was essentially asked to choose between being a pawn of Lady Stoneheart or dying. So I do wonder if the Karstarks aren't being offered a similar choice. Become Stannis' pawns or die. I choose this. One of the grandsons seized his sword hilt and made to draw it. That proved to be a poor choice. The grandson's blade had not even cleared his scabbard before 2 of the king's knights were on him. It ended with his forearm flopping in the dirt and blood spurting from his stump, and one of his brothers stumbling for the stairs, clutching a belly wound. He staggered up 6 steps before he fell and came crashing back down to the floor. Neither Arnulf Karstark nor his son had moved. Take them away, the king commanded. The sight of them sours my stomach. Within moments, the 5 men had been bound and removed. The one who had lost his sword arm had fainted from loss of blood, but his brother with the belly wound screamed loud enough for both of them. So one of the grandsons proceeds to fight for his life. There are quite a few options on what's going on here. Perhaps he's Cregan's son and was in on it, hoping one day to inherit Karhold. Or perhaps he's Arthur's son and was in on it, hoping for some sort of reward. Or perhaps he's innocent and just panicked. Whatever the case, he loses an arm and has a good chance of dying. Strangely, a second grandson is stabbed, but we have no evidence that he actually resisted. He's still alive, but he has a good chance of dying as well. I again wonder if he was Cregan's son or Arthur's son, and whether he was complicit or not. This leaves a third grandson who didn't move and wasn't stabbed. I would love to know if this was the grandson that was wearing the armor, but we have no information on that. Whoever he is, he likely just jumped up a bit in Karhold's succession. Now weirdly, Stannis sends them all away without the confessions that he apparently wanted. It is possible that Stannis got all of the information he was looking for. Arnulf essentially outed himself, and Arthur essentially proved his innocence. Earlier in the chapter, when Stannis is told about the breakfast, Stannis specifically asks if the son is attending, Arthur. Establishing Arthur's guilt or innocence seems to be the most important thing here. The grandson's actions are again interesting, but I'm not sure if their actions prove their complicity or not, or whether the third grandson is a schemer. It may be that they will be used as hostages in order to keep Arthur in line, After all, Stannis does need someone to lead the Karstark army. And Arthur may not like the idea of his dad being burned alive or turning on the Boltons, but with his sons as hostages, he doesn't have much choice. I'm open to the possibility that the third grandson is Stannis' man and will lead the forces, but Stannis didn't seem very interested in the grandsons overall.
"That is how I deal with betrayal, Turncloak,"
Stannis informed Theon.
"My name is Theon." "As you will. Tell me, Theon, how many men did Mors Umber have with him at Winterfell?"
"None. No men." He grinned at his own wit. "He had boys. I saw them." Aside from a handful of half-crippled sergeants, the warriors that Crowfood had brought down from the last hearth were hardly old enough to shave. "Their spears and axes were older than the hands that clutched them. It was Horsebane Umber who had the men inside the castle. I saw them too. Old men, every one." Theon tittered. "Mors took the green boys, and Hother took the greybeards. All the real men went with the Great John and died at the Red Wedding. Is that what you wanted to know, Your Grace?" So once again, Stannis goes out of his way to threaten Theon, which is a bit odd as Theon has been pretty forthcoming with information. It seems that Stannis is trying to coerce Theon into doing something else through fear. But also, let's actually take Stannis literally. We know how he deals with betrayal. We have Mance Rayder as an example. He uses betrayers to his advantage. So Theon again tells Stannis that his name is Theon. The first time Theon does this, Stannis refuses to call him by his name. Now Stannis switches from being bad cop to good cop and concedes. This is actually sort of a big deal. If we go back to A Dance with Dragons, very few people call Theon by his name. A few people call him Theon Turncloak, and Roose Bolton introduces him once formally as Theon of House Greyjoy. But really only Jane Poole, Rowan the Spearwife, and Asha ever call him Theon. Oh, and Bran in the Heart Tree. Stannis then asks Theon how many men Mors Umber had with him at Winterfell. Now, I'm sure Tycho Nestoris already told Stannis the size of Umber's force. Perhaps Stannis just wants to be sure, or perhaps Stannis is judging the quality of Theon's answers. Theon seems to sense what Stannis really wants, and he gives him an interesting response about not the size of the force, but the quality. No men are with Mors, only boys, while Horsebane has all the old men. All the real men died at the Red Wedding. Now, if the boys are with Mors and the Greybeards are with Horsebane, that means there's some coordination going on between the two Umber forces. Horsebane and Mors are on the same side after all, and that's good news for Stannis. But there's more. You don't send green boys into war for a couple reasons. One, they likely suck at fighting. But two, children are the future. Without the green boys, there are no future Umbers. Greybeards, although they may suck at fighting, are expendable. So they may be able to do something risky. Now I should mention that Theon is forgetting something. Back in A Clash of Kings, Theon hears about an Umber host gathering against him, but then he notes that they don't come fight him at Winterfell. So Theon may in fact be wrong about all the real men dying at the Red Wedding. There should be another Umber host out there, unless Theon was talking about a host filled with greybeards and green boys. King Stannis ignored the jibe.
"Boys,"
was all he said, disgusted.
"Boys will not hold Lord Bolton long."
"Not long," Theon agreed. "Not long at all."
"Not long,"
cried the raven from its cage. The king gave the bird an irritated look. So this is an odd little aside from Stannis. Naturally, Mors Umber's boys wouldn't hold off Lord Bolton for long. In fact, I doubt Mors would try to have them hold off Bolton at all. Why would anyone have the future of their families mowed down by an enormous Frey host? To delay them an hour? It wouldn't be worth it. Still, Stannis seems to be mulling over what to do with Mors Umber's green boy host. Whatever it is, it ought to be something that doesn't involve fighting too much or risking their lives.
"The Braavosi banker claimed Sir Aenys Frey is dead. Did some boy do that?"
20 green boys, with spades, Theon told him. "The snow fell heavily for days, so heavily that you could not see the castle walls 10 yards away. No more than the men up on the battlements could see what was happening beyond those walls. So Crowfoot set his boys to digging pits outside the castle gates, then blew his horn to lure Lord Bolton out. Instead, he got the Freys. The snow covered up the pits, so they rode right into them. Aenys broke his neck, I heard, but Sir Hosteen only lost a horse, more's the pity.
He will be angry now.
Strangely, Stannis smiled.
Angry foes do not concern me. Anger makes men stupid, and Hosteen Frey was stupid to begin with. If half of what I've heard of him is true, let him come.
He will. So here we find out that Tycho Nestoris did in fact already brief Stannis on the situation outside Winterfell. I guess Tycho either didn't do a great job, or perhaps Stannis is just double-checking the information with Theon, or perhaps Stannis wants to see how forthcoming Theon's been. Now, Aenys Frey apparently died by falling into a pit hidden by snow that the Umber boys dug. And somehow Tycho and Theon caught wind of this death as well. Perhaps Umber boys were hiding in the snow nearby? Now Stannis smiles at this, and with good reason. His camp is of course surrounded by a frozen lake, with holes in it covered by snow. If the Freys fell for this trick once, maybe they'll fall for it again. Now Theon says that Hosteen Frey will be angry, and Stannis thinks this is all for good, since anger makes people stupid, and he thinks Hosteen Frey was stupid to begin with. I'm actually not so sure Hosteen will be all that angry. The march to Stannis is a 3-day ride, slower if he has to wait for men afoot. He may be well calmed down. And I'm not so sure Hosteen is all that stupid. Hosteen is actually one of the few Freys we know a lot about. He's famous for being a great knight, a great jouster, and a seasoned soldier. Granted, he's no commander, but he's not an idiot who simply charges into battle. In a Game of Thrones, Hosteen is captured by Lannister forces, presumably at the Battle of the Green Fork. Of course, the Battle of the Green Fork was a mere distraction, allowing Robb to win the Battle of the Whispering Wood. They were expected to lose the Battle of the Green Fork, so Hosteen Frey surrendering here is actually the smart and reasoned move. After being freed, he's next found in a clash of kings with Roose Bolton, expressing his displeasure that Winterfell is lost. He believes Robb has lost the war and should sue for peace. Again, this is probably a smart move, certainly smarter than Robb's plan to attack Moat Cailin and then try to retake the north while abandoning the Riverlands. In A Storm of Swords, we find him at the Red Wedding, cutting down Lucas Blackwood. Now this, I grant, is a pretty dumb move. Lucas Blackwood was much more valuable as a hostage who could have facilitated a Blackwood surrender. Finally, we find him in A Dance with Dragons, wanting to ride forth to meet Stannis in the field before he can join with the Karstarks. In truth, although this is a simple solution that would certainly cost many lives, this is actually a pretty valid move. The Boltons have a bigger, better provisioned force that would likely defeat Stannis. However, Hosteen isn't listened to because Roose Bolton is cautious and didn't want to use his forces, and because he plans on using the Karstarks to double-cross Stannis. This is a case where Hosteen's simplicity was actually superior to Bolton's complexity. The rest of the time Hosteen spends not trusting the Manderleys. Of course, the Manderleys shouldn't be trusted. So Hosteen isn't just a single-minded bull who will charge into battle as his nickname Sir Stupid suggests. His mistrust and occasional desire to surrender show a deal of cautiousness. And this makes me wonder about Hosteen's approach on Stannis' camp. Will he truly just march his entire force forward onto a frozen lake to drown? Let's keep in mind he already fell into pits once from marching forward blindly. Why wouldn't he assume that Stannis has similar pits? And Hosteen rightfully fears that the Manderleys will be sneak attacking him. From what we know about Hosteen, he should be approaching the camp cautiously while watching for sneak attacks from all directions. Stannis' lake trick may indeed work to some extent, but not likely as thoroughly as he hopes.
Bolton has blundered, the king declared. All he had to do was sit inside his castle whilst we starved. Instead, he has sent some portion of his strength forth to give us battle. His knights will be horsed, ours must fight afoot. His men will be well nourished, ours go into battle with empty bellies. It makes no matter. Sir Stupid, Lord Too Fat, the bastard, let them come. We hold the ground, and that I mean to turn to our advantage.
The ground? Said Theon.
What ground? Here? This misbegotten tower? This wretched little village? You have no high ground here. No walls to hide behind? No natural defenses? Yet!
Both ravens screamed in unison. Then one quirked, and the other muttered,
Tree!
Now the fact that Stannis is happy about some portion of the strength coming out does seem to support the idea that Stannis will be using that portion of strength. He goes so far to call it a blunder. Perhaps Stannis' men will be posing as friendly soldiers at some point to sneak into either Winterfell or the Dreadfort. He would essentially be using Roose and Ramsay's strategy against them. Next, Stannis mentions the advantages that Bolton has. His men will be horsed and nourished. Of course, this also means that they'll be heavier and more likely to break through ice. Stannis' emaciated, horseless men will certainly be light, especially if they're only leather-clad clansmen. Now again we see a consensus between Stannis and Theon on the number of forces that are coming forth. 3, the Freys, the Manderleys, and Ramsay. And the biggest tell that Stannis has something big planned is his statement that he has the ground. Theon is incredulous. What natural defenses, he asks. Whatever they are, they have to be something that can be created, and created in a relatively short period of time. Winterfell is just a 3-day ride from Stannis' village, which means Theon's crew, with no sleep and hard riding, may have been able to get there in 2. But now a night has passed, so the Freys, if all mounted, should be upon them in half a day. If a portion of the Frey host is afoot, maybe they'll have another couple days. Still, Stannis doesn't have very much time either way. The door opened. Beyond the world was white. The Knight of the Three Moths entered, his legs caked with snow. He stomped his feet to knock it off and said, "Your Grace, the Karstarks are taken. A few of them resisted and died for it. Most were too confused and yielded quietly. We have herded them into the Long Hall and confined them there."
"Well done."
"They say they did not know, the ones we've questioned."
"They would."
"We might question them more sharply."
"No, I believe them. Karstark could never have hoped to keep his treachery a secret if he shared his plans with every base-born manjack in his service. Some drunken spearman would have let it slip one night whilst laying with a whore. They did not need to know. They are Carhold men. When the moment came, they would have obeyed their lords, as they have done all their lives."
So as Richard Horpe returns, we can see that it's now well into morning, and considering his legs are caked with snow, we see that it's still snowing. If Stannis is hoping for snow to cover holes in the lake, he has it. Now the taking of the Karstark men went mostly like the taking of the Karstarks themselves. Some resisted, perhaps through panic, while others were confused. It seems the bulk of the Karstark men knew nothing of Arnulf's betrayal, which is a good thing for Stannis. But it also paints a picture of innocence around Arthur Karstark. He didn't need to know what was going on, and therefore wasn't told. In one fell swoop, Stannis may have turned a false friend into a real friend, or at least a reluctant friend. Stannis holds Arthur's sons as hostages, and can get Arthur to lead the Karstarks if he pleases. Interestingly, Stannis mentions that men are naturally more loyal to their lord than their king. This is of course an idea taken from Davos back in A Storm of Swords, when Stannis was considering invading Claw Island. Stannis previously thought men should follow their king, but Davos pointed out that Stannis himself followed his lord Robert over Aerys, his king. Stannis had no doubt that the Karstark men would have followed their lord and not their king when the time of betrayal was to happen. So Stannis has evolved a bit since those days in A Storm of Swords where he expected everyone to flock to him because he was the king. Stannis now has become a bit more like Renly. He plays the game of securing lords, knowing that lords make kings. Now it should be noted that the Karstark men are now all herded into the Long Hall, and the Karstarks themselves are in custody. These are the people that could easily recognize Arnulf and would be against his execution. Now Stannis' other men have also met Arnulf, at least the senior leadership has, so an Arnulf-Theon swap needs a little help to make it feasible. A glamour perhaps? Or a quick burning so the body isn't recognizable? Or perhaps he'll be kept at a distance so that the Northerners can't recognize him. The Queen's men don't care who's burned, just as long as someone is burned. As you say, sire.
What of your own losses?
One of Lord Peaseberry's men was killed, and 2 of mine were wounded. If it please your grace, though, the men are growing anxious. There are hundreds of them gathered around the tower, wondering what's happened. Talk of treason is on every lip. No one knows who to trust, or who might be arrested next. The Northmen especially.
I need to talk with them. Is Wool still waiting?
Him and Artos Flint. Will you see them?
Shortly. The Kraken first.
As you command. The knight took his leave. Now it's very interesting who Stannis sends to round up the Karstarks. Horpe men and Peaseberry men. Remember, Stannis has with him Kingsmen, that is, southern lords who support him because he's a Baratheon, and Queensmen, that is, southern lords that support him because he's a follower of R'hllor. He also has the Hill clans and the Karstarks. Now in the Deepwood report, Stannis claims he has other northerners, but we don't see them anywhere. He was likely lying, hoping that the news would make it back to Winterfell and create distrust among the Northerners there. Anyway, Richard Horp is Stannis' most trusted knight. According to Stannis in this chapter, though, he only pretends to be a Queensman. He's truly a Kingsman. House Peaseberry is the other, and we know them to be Kingsmen. In fact, it was members of House Peaseberry that were burned for cannibalism. So the Peaseberries are likely anti-Queensmen, and they're notably hostile towards Northerners. Now, Lord Peaseberry himself was spared by Stannis, despite possibly taking part in the cannibalism. So it seems Stannis has turned Lord Peaseberry, possibly through fear and isolation, into one of his most trusted men. But why choose Kingsmen to round up Karstarks over, say, Queensmen or Northerners? Well, Stannis sits in the middle of a delicate balance. The Northerners want Theon, but we know exactly how valuable Theon is to the Ironborn and the Glovers. Stannis could possibly swap in Arnulf Karstark, but if the Karstarks find out, he might lose them. He can try to make Arnulf unrecognizable, perhaps by keeping him at a distance and then burning him, but then he's not killing him in the Northern way. Stannis might be able to behead him and then burn him, but it's a very delicate situation. This may be why he must rely on Kingsmen to keep everything together until the battle with the Freys. And that's all for now. We'll continue on in Theon I, Part 7.